I think some of you did it, and you probably had some fun doing it. I have done this before, but not on this subject. I did it 3 times on 3 different subjects. I don't believe, if you're going to do this, I don't believe you can do it on something that isn't genuinely difficult for you to say. So this is only the 4th time I did it, and the last time was over a decade ago, because one of the confidentialities a person shared at that last meeting I did was that they intended to kill themselves that night. So I was scared stiff of doing that ever since that point. But this middle-aged lady was so happy to be graduating. Man, it was worth the risk, I think. Okay, the shame of the risk profession. Let's just assume it's a profession. You can argue whether it's actually a profession or a role that various professionals get involved in. But let's just, for the sake of it, let's call it a profession. And then what we can do is we can have a look at how does it compare with one of the traditional professions. I'm going to compare a little bit with the medical profession, and specifically surgeons, and I'm going to compare with engineering, which was my own background. Any lawyers here? Oh, good. All right. I'll drop them off because I was scared that if I made a mistake.
I'm going to be here, but you couldn't make this before.
Well, I'm not talking about lawyers. Frightening people. So, my general point is that there is something really unimpressive about where we're at. And yet that's despite having some really, really classy people work in the profession and work on the profession going back hundreds of years. So I'll try and uncover some of those things. I get into a lot of detail about how you go about risk, but we'll have a dig at what goes for risk for most organisations. This picture looks at the snake oil salesman, which is something that always fascinated me. I saw so many I saw so many westerns when I was young, and the snake oil salesman always bemused me. You know, they were obviously such shonky people. Why would people buy the stuff? And I thought, well, it's got to be to do with the fact that they were naive then. They didn't get much external input. But people still buy stuff like this. If you look at the TV shows that are just selling products, people still buy stuff from people like this. So then I started thinking, well, maybe the reason is if the need is desperate enough and a genuine solution there isn't there, people will buy any solution. I thought maybe that's a more positive way of looking at this thing. The pictures up there obviously show a surgeon, and the other picture is, I can't imagine anybody in this room being an EastEnders fan, but it's a character from EastEnders. And the character is a smiling, using loads and loads of phrases, got some little tools, and he's supposed to motivate people and move people, right? And he doesn't do any of those things. It's all smoke and mirrors, there is no output. And this actor does it very, very well. So here's my representation of the current day snake oil salesman. And I'm fearful that the majority of risk professionals are more akin to him than they're akin to a full professional, a proper professional. And that's the concept I wanted to have a look at today. Now, there is a great deal of thought goes on with me. Was a snake oil salesman a step towards a proper health industry, a step towards proper surgery. Was it a step towards it, or was it just an obstacle to get there? And the profession overcame that obstacle. And that's important to me because I think the risk profession's in the same boat today. I don't know whether the way a lot of people are looking at risk and doing risk today is the early semblance of something decent, or it is a hurdle we might never get over. So, I'm going to guess that this will do it. So, if I look at super talent in the past that's been involved with the professions, we got any people from medicine in the room, particularly surgeons? Anybody from that background? All right. So we're not gonna recognise this guy on the left. The guy on the left is Thomas Vickery. He was the sergeant surgeon to Henry VIII in London. He said, we can't have all these amateurs cutting into people. We've got to make this a proper profession. And he persuaded Henry VIII to give his nod to the company of surgeon barbers. Right? I think that little sign was a hint that I think some of you will know that barbers used to be surgeons. And this was the first time that a profession had somebody come along and say, can't let anybody do this, let's get it organised. There's some engineers here, aren't there? Anybody notice the guy in the middle? Know who that is? Right. All right. He's the guy who started the Institute of Mechanical Engineers because the civil engineers wouldn't let him in. No, that's Stuart Stephenson. Right. And the reason I didn't start with the civils is A, because I was mechanical, but it's B, because you can't pick the beginning of civils. You know, buildings have been there forever, and it's kind of really hard to pick it as a current profession. But George Stephenson got rejected by the Civil Institute and started the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. Now, you know, I didn't pick a brilliant surgeon, even though there were brilliant surgeons that deserve it in modern medicine. There are many other mechanical engineers I could have picked. The reason I picked these two people is because whether or not they were great professionals in what they did, they actually created a body to represent that profession, and that body had a real image of what it wanted to create. Now, the risk industry had some terrific heroes in the past. The one shown is Daniel Bernoulli. There's a couple of Bernoullis from the Bernoulli family that have contributed enormously to the theory of probability and the law of large numbers. But Daniel, the last slide I'll show you today is something Daniel wrote. And it's astonishing how good this guy was then. Not only the mathematics, which he and his uncle Jacob led, but going beyond the mathematics. Bernoulli understood things that the average board today and the average professional today don't have a clue about. And they're valid and they're available to us, and they've been so for hundreds of years. So what really worries me is, well, we don't have a Vickery, we don't have a Stephenson, right? Is it too late for this industry to get their act together? how bad is it? Well, the truth is we still have a lot of really great technical people in risk. This guy, Tony Barrell, he'd be in his 80s now. I don't even know. I don't think he's died. I think we'd have heard about it if we had. But he was involved, instrumental in most of the big safety disasters that we think about in the last 40 years or so. So everything from Flicksborough, which killed about 30 people, and it was a weekend, so if the office block had been full as it was on every day, it would have killed hundreds of people. The King's Cross Underground fire, Piper Alpha, and Bhopal in India. Bhopal in India killed nearly 4,000 people in an industrial accident. This guy was in the thick of all of those. They usually had a former judge or something leading some kind of inquiry, royal inquiry. But Tony was at the right end of all of these people. He's a great risk manager, and likes a good red wine, by the way, and can consume quite a few of them. Sadly, people of Tony's ilk, these are highly qualified. They're largely PhD people. Technically, they know how to calculate risk and do meaningful things with it. Sadly, that expertise is largely limited to a small part of the safety world and the reliability world, right? So it doesn't spread over into strategic risk, corporate risk, reputation risk, stuff like that. But I just wanted to say, it exists. But the idea of these scales is the ratio of the bullshitters to these class acts is much greater than 10 to 1. And that's a big problem we've got. Now, not only did those industrial safety events prompt the development of some great risk assessment and risk analysis tools. There were at the turn of the century, there were the WorldComs and the Enrons, right? Enormous business failures. And those failures created a lot of fuss, a lot of regulation in stock markets. But they didn't actually change how are we going to do this? How are we going to bring this together in any semblance? The biggest thing that happened in risk, in the way of good and bad news, all centered on a single document. And Tom, you know this document very well. Australian standard, Australian and New Zealand standard. Any New Zealanders in the room? I could have got away with Australian standard. 4360 came out in 1995. The committee that did it created a standard that the world came to recognise as the standard on risk management. It had a brief that was to not talk to any particular user. So it was talking to the little guy who ran a chip shop, and it was talking to the biggest companies on earth. For that reason, you can imagine it had difficulty in specifying how to go. So it didn't specify, it talked from a step back, gave an overview of a process, and said there are many, many ways you can do this. The one problem that had, Tom was on the committee that developed that. The chairman of that committee was Professor Jean Cross. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman and done wonderful stuff on risk management. But she will tell you, as she's told me, her biggest regret is putting only one potential solution in that original document. And that one potential solution was called risk matrix. And that wasn't in the appendix, it wasn't in the main body. But it gave every backsliding con man a chance to offer business compliance. 4360 never offered compliance. The current global ISO standard doesn't offer compliance. But that doesn't stop consultants running around saying they can help you comply with the standard. And that one hiccup has meant that probably something around, well, if you search the risk frameworks of the top 100 companies in Australia, you will find less than one handful have anything more substance than the risk management for their overall business risk framework. Right? So if they're in a hazardous industry, they'll certainly do better stuff on safety. If they're in weaponry or aircraft, they'll have wonderful reliability risk assessments. But as an overall business, almost everybody is using this childish tool for their overall business assessment. Now, this is the tool. Have any of you seen the risk metrics and the risk registers? Right. Okay. It's usually coloured in, right? So I'm not going to allocate anything to the standard that the standard didn't have. This was the original from the standard, right? And people usually colour the low risk bits, green, and the high risk bits red. Now, for some things, this is fine. It just asks you to say how often and how bad will it be. So you draw a finger along there and a finger down there and say that's how often it will be that bad. It's qualitative in the extreme, and it's good for low consequence, high frequency stuff. Right? But then most people could do it with or without the matrix, to be honest, that stuff. Let's have a look at some of the limitations. I've picked fairly simple limitations of this tool, but they permeate everything you do in it. So, for example, the example by the standard had 5 graduations for likelihood. Now, the standard didn't say you have to have 5. It didn't say you had to have 5 consequence steps. It just said, look, you can do it this way, was one example. You can do it this way. Now, so occasionally people go as far as 7 steps. Some go down to 4 by 4 in this thing. But whatever way you do it, you're talking about frequencies of sometimes many times a year, sometimes daily frequencies, and you're talking about other things like the Piper Alpha disaster of more than 1,000,000 to 1, right? Once in 1,000,000 years. Okay. So for a given organisation. So somehow in these 5 steps, we've got to cover this enormous range. For those that are mathematically inclined, difference between the top one and the bottom one is 1 times 10 to the power of 8, 9, 10. That's the kind of range you're trying to do that. So that means somewhere these boxes are enormous. Right? Either all the boxes are enormous, or you make these boxes, these 3 middle ones, reasonable jumps, and then box A is gigantic and box E is gigantic in the likelihood of things happening. So if I'm a gambler, right, and I am to play craps, the difference between a 7 and snake eyes is enormous. Right? 1 and 1 will come up 1 time in 36 throws. Combinations of 7, 1 and 6, 2 and 5, 3 and 4, will come up 6 times in 36 throws. That's an enormous difference if you're playing in that zone. It's the same thing in this matrix. That's on likelihood of something occurring. On risk, well, you know, a motorcyclist and a car driver, and for that matter, a massive comet hitting the Earth and wiping out the Earth, are all in this box. Now, the chance of dying driving a car is 30 times less than the chance of dying riding a motorbike. Right? The tool that is generally used for business purposes, right, can't distinguish between those things. The thing that the matrix is sold on is that everybody understands it. It's simple to understand, and everybody can use it. So, by all means, if you need the very simple people to understand it, then they can use it for that, right? But to leave your strategy, to leave your material impacts in business, to leave the economy of a country in the hands of a tool like this, which is done, is farcical in the extreme. So I've said it doesn't have. Oh, by the way, this lady, Lottie Williams. She is the one and only person ever to have the misfortune of being hit by space debris re-entering the Earth. Now, if I said to you on this matrix, which is this is happens many times a year, and this happens in 1 in 1,000 years or more, right? Where would you put it on the likelihood? Right? Hey, you're all right. Yeah, spot on. Where would you put it on this consequence? Let me tell you, this is from just walk away, didn't worry you, and this is multiple fatalities. So we're in safety. Let's put it there, or you know, because this is a safety issue. So which one of these would you put it in? 5, 4, 5. She said it was the equivalent of being hit on the shoulder by an empty beer can. Right? She actually thought somebody had tapped her on the shoulder. Now, one of the big problems with this thing, when you look into it, whether it's about money, whether it's about reputation, whether it's about safety, people confuse exactly what you've confused. That the frequency of this thing coming down and hitting somebody will end up with the worst credible consequence. That gap between is commonly missing. The other problem with this is, if these boxes are enormous, let's say this one's 10 times bigger than this one, right? If you want to move from one box down to another box, you've got to reduce your risk by 90%. There's not many things you can do that can reduce your risk by 90%. Right? And yet, business frameworks talk about if it's in a red area, you've got to get it out of the red area. You know? Right? So people say, oh, well, you know, coming down from extreme to high. Right? There's no way you've earned coming down from extreme to high. The matrix can't show that kind of thing. You can't build a business case on the matrix, right? Because it's not granular enough to do it. The other problem is the matrix, because it's simple, allowed the business to say, look, we just want to know the big things that come up. Right? So you get stuck into finding the things we should be worried about, the risk events we should be worried about, and you do the risk on it and tell us where it falls. And if it comes up in the red, we want to have a certain sign-off on it. The point is nobody is telling anybody what a risk event is, right? So, if I've got a problem, safety is the easiest thing in the world, right? To do risk on, because it shows things up for the silliness now. If I say dropping something from above on somebody is a risk, and I find it's in the red, right? Then I just say, well, dropping tools from above and dropping equipment from above, right? And then if that doesn't say it, I can drop to dropping hammers and dropping screwdrivers. You see what I'm saying? You can get any answer you want by breaking down the problem. So the kind of stuff that the risk analyst is that a safety reliability mostly?
No, it covers the whole game.
Right. Okay. All quantitative or
That's the implication in the United States is risk analysis is quantitative.
right. Okay. So if you don't do quantification, which means if you don't say statistically you're going to lose so many dollars a year, if you don't say statistically you're going to leave so many lives a year, you can't do anything meaningful with the stuff that comes out of it. You can't aggregate it up to say the overall risk is this. You can't say I've got two options of doing this. This one gives me a half the risk, but costs an absolute fortune. This other one gives me nearly half the risk and costs not much. You can't do any of those things. So what we're saying is this beast is crippling sensible management. Now, the suspects for who's at fault on this. Well, we could look at the risk professionals and its institute, the RMIA, that's the primary Australian institute, or the board and its institute. Now, the reason I've got a token collector here is when businesses and organisations first invested in risk management, the senior people probably thought this really was going to be something good, right? Same as when you get asked for a donation for starving kids or rainforests, right? When it first started up, the charity thing, it was of course. And then you start thinking, well, we're not changing things in this way. The money's not getting through, it's not having a big enough impact. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody said, give me half your salary and there will be no hunger in the world, right? Right? Because we can get everybody else to do it, I'd be in like Flint. Right? I feel much better than I do with twice the salary and knowing there's all this hostility in the world. Right? Right? But basically, when you know that it's not making a difference, the kind of difference you want, what you do is you start paying without belief. And if you pay without belief, you stop looking at what's being delivered. And I think business did that. They started saying, oh great, let's hire ourselves a risk manager, blah, 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 blah. And when they didn't get what they expected, by then the laws were in place saying you've got to do it. The stock exchange says you've got to do it. Right? So there isn't a way out. So you talk as though you believe in it, you pay the money into the sinkhole as though you believe in it. Right? But basically management have stopped believing in it. And the few managers that do believe in it are unable to persuade their board of directors to change, because if you're in the board of directors, I deliberately went for a very old one because I think that's the mindset of a lot of Australian boards. Yeah. The mindset is back at that time. There are a lot more women directors nowadays. It's one of the areas they're careful to do that. But the problem is those boards, like this little matrix. It says, I've got all their risks here, right? Because the board's job, the board's legal requirement set the appetite, and oversee the application of the process, right? They don't have to create the process, they don't have to probe the detail of anything, right? So that's oversight. So if you're a board member and somebody brings you up the risk register and everything, somebody's in the green, some's in the yellow, stuff's in the red, you say, what's this in the red? You know, this is not good enough in the red, right? I want to see, next time we sit here, I want to see that out the red. You've done your oversight. It's very hard to move boards. I'm going to rush through now, but you've got to say a complicating and a disappointing factor in this is that boards have a lovely tight relationship with the big four accounting firms because they do all their internal and external audit. However, these same firms make a lot of money on their advisory, which includes risk management, and they are all risk matrix-based systems that those four use. Right? So why would you upset your internal or external auditor for something you don't know if it can even work? And you don't really know if it's better, and it's certainly not easier for you. So the lack of development by large numbers of the industry and the lack of genuine interest by the board means we're not really looking at big ticket items in any kind of decent manner. So, how do we fix it? I've got to say from the beginning, I'm not sure we can, right? Tom, I know this is very depressing, but I'm not sure we can do anything good. Improve professional standards through the uni system. The uni's got its own headaches, right? The way, and I certainly don't know Melbourne Uni, the way Uni SA is working is schools are little silos. Schools don't want anybody stepping on their patch, right? They're happy to sell one of their units to go in somebody else's, but they're not willing to pull something together. They're not willing to talk with other schools. So in risk management, you need business and you need a technical school, engineering schools to come together. You probably need the site school to come along as well, if you're going to do this well, right? But try and do that, and it's not it. But if somebody could, and if you created a stream of people that came out knowing how to do good risk assessment, how to come from the top down, saying, this is what my organisation is being measured on, here are the performance measures, the risks I want to know how they hit each of these performance measures, right? And they've all got to aggregate up by quantification. The only way you can stop people sneaking under is by being able to add up all the little bits. Right? If you could turn out people like that, you could do the change. Melbourne particularly, somebody at RMIT, they could do that. Will it happen? I think very unlikely. Wake up the executives and directors. That's what I spend more than half of my time doing. It's exhausting because you convince a few to do it. There are a couple of the biggest companies in Australia, and towards the biggest in the world, that do good quantification across the board in their business, do have decent systems for doing it. But CEOs are like dogs and trees, right? As soon as a CEO goes, a new CEO comes in, they want to pee in the corner. They want to change everything, right? So what happens is sometimes a good risk management system goes out with a new CEO. Acquisitions and mergers are another way of killing one of the facing things that you do. But it can happen, and this is where I'll keep focusing. Still not great odds. Then you come down to the desperation. The Quisling thing is what most good people are doing. That's saying, look, I'll just ride with it till the timing's better, and then I'll turn around and do it. If I'm boring my good friend Caroline, I must be boring all of you, so I'll shut it up. But the Quisling says, just go with it. It's kind of like a politician saying, I've got to stay in the cabinet, right? Because I can make more of a change with this lousy cabinet than I could if I was outside, right? It's not much of an option to me. The French resistance option, that's the one which says, I'm not going to fight fair, I'm going to come out, I'm going to hit targets, I'm going to hurt the enemy, and I'm going to go back to my hideout and come out again. I'm just not sure who the enemy is if you do that. Somebody suggested to me, an ex-KPMG partner suggested to me, Tony, you know, it's very late on in your career, you don't need to worry about your career. Why don't you side with a legal firm and show up, legal firms that are going after companies, how bad their risk management is? And the other, and it said maybe do it with the union as well. The point is, I like companies. I've lived most of my life working for or you know, on behalf of companies, and I don't think they're evil. I think they're quite incompetent at some things, and this is one of them. But it just wouldn't feel right to do that. So I got to tell you, I'm not hopeful for our profession. But then I look back and say, look, the snake oil salesman didn't really get in the way of anything. You know, I wish we were further along than the snake oil salesman now. But if we're not, in large part, maybe that's not the end of the story. Maybe I won't be around for it. I told you I'd leave you just reading this as I walk away. Daniel Bernoulli. So he's done all the numbers, right? He says, all right, I know the difference between throwing a 7 and throwing a snake eyes, right? But then he starts to say, but the risk number is the same for all people, but the risk you can take is very different for varied people. This is 270, 280 years ago, and is far in advance of 90% of what risk professionals are taking to their business today. So, sad story. It's not hard to be an expert in a bad in a bad field. I do some of the engineers, some of the commercial people that work on Monte Carlo project, the atom bomb. The way they helped build the atom bomb was to look at something Daniel's uncle did. That results in with PCs today, results in the ability to churn out figures on the way things might turn out and ways to hedge your bets. There is so much good work there that is not being picked up, that is not being used. So, sorry, if whatever profession you come from, you must be a lot happier and prouder of yours than I am of mine right now, but I'm still hopeful.